Hey, this is Paul, and today I'm going to show you how to root dragon fruit cuttings. As you can see, I've done it thousands of times, and it's one of my favorite things to do. So during the summer, you want a different strategy, and that's going to be using soil. In fact, this is Sunshine Mix number 4, and that's what I recommend using. Now, you can use a rooting hormone as well, or I really like using Vermistera's Vitality, but honestly, it's optional. This time of year with our summer right now, in the middle of the growing season, you can take a young or old cutting and just stick it in here. Whether you put on that rooting hormone or not, this thing's gonna root in no time. So what you wanna do is very carefully, especially with this Hyloceras broxensis here, it's very, very sharp spines here. What you wanna do is you wanna carefully tie it on with planter's tape to a post. I like to use these bamboo posts because we grow lots of different types of bamboo, but just about anything would do that's not metal, so it doesn't want to transfer too much heat. Now the key is when I root these is I always stick the node graft right barely into the soil dry, and then I water it really heavily. So again, you don't want to go too deep, just slightly in there, just like that. That's what I like to do. And I'll tie it again. And this thing will root in just about a month using Sunshine Mix number 4. And what I mean by rooting, it's gonna have this whole 1 gallon pot full of roots. So young cutting, old cutting, it doesn't matter. Here's another one I'll show you that I like to root. Here's a nice, beautiful, large Hana. And this one's a bit on the younger side. So what I did for this one, I had a little bit different strategy. As if you can see, I broke the tip off yesterday. So I cut this, it's a node graft, or a node cut, excuse me, and those are my preference. They will root a little bit less quickly than, say, a horizontal cut that you let callus over, but in the long term I've noticed that these node cuts like this one, they tend to rot less. So it will root less prolifically, but the benefit of a node cut over a flesh cut is going to be that, in my experience, they rot less often. So I prefer a node cut just like this one. And again, barely stick it into that dry soil. And then I'm going to water this really, really well. And that's all I use is Sunshine Mix number 4 in this hot house that you can see here. This is UV protected. It's over 100 degrees in here. It's really hot right now. Don't get me wrong, and it's in the shade. But they love this high heat, and they do not like sun. In other words, the worst thing you could do with a cutting like this is go put it out in the sun. This thing's gonna get sunburned in one day, and you're gonna kill this beautiful cutting, especially because some of these are so expensive nowadays. You gotta be really careful with when you're rooting them. So here's an example. Look at this one. This is Gray Panama. It's a younger cutting. I rooted it a month ago in here, and look at that. So we've done some other videos on our potting soil and rooting strategies here, but this is how I do it, and I've done it again and again. Look at all of these. And I've been 100% successfully doing it this way. So no rot. I mean, look at this little Sunta 5 Paco. It's even got a flower bud. So this time of year, this is the #1 way I like to do it. Young, old, small cuttings, it doesn't matter. I broke off this little Queen Daenerys, look at that, and look at the roots. I mean, look at that little plant. So this is the most successful way I've ever been able to root dragon fruit this year. This has changed everything in my humble opinion. I really hope you guys give it a try because it's working out awesome for us. Hey, this is Paul, and I get the question a lot. What do I do? My dragon fruit are yellowing. They're yellow. How do I fix it? Well, there is a myriad of factors here on why these plants yellow. So first thing is the time of year. Yellow in the winter is going to be totally different than yellow during our summer growing season. Now in this case, it's not a lack of nutrients, it's not a lack of water. This is straight UV damage. There's too much sun hitting these plants right here. Now remember, these are epiphytic cacti. They're not desert cacti. And what they do in nature is they climb up trees in the shade spots, and these trellises kind of mimic it, right? You can see there's no damage here on the base, right? But it's up on the canopy. And the reason why is because these plants naturally are climbers. They're epiphytes up trees, and you can see this one here has popped out. So this is gonna yellow. I should actually break off the tip, And then if this was a mature branch, I'd be getting a fruit off of here. So in other words, these plants kind of need some yellowing to stress in order to produce fruit, as you can see here. See, there's yellowing, and it's not always bad. Now, if I had a lot of money, I would put up 30 to 50% shade cloth here, probably about 45% personally, and I would have the ability to move it however I want, open it and close it. But I can't afford to do that yet, maybe someday. And some varieties, they do fine in full sun. Some are definitely more sensitive. So what I've learned after growing hundreds of varieties here, as you can see, is that I can look at a plant pretty carefully and realize if it's bad and if I need to treat it. So you can see this is fine, I'm not worried about that, but this yellow here, I'm starting to get a little more concerned. I don't know if you could see the white there. There's another example up here. Not too concerned about this yellow here, but see right here, that's going to be permanent damage. So ways to treat this is you can easily put up a shade cloth, you can throw burlap on like I do, and you could put up an umbrella. There are tons of ways that you can treat and protect these plants. And look at here, I had this covered for about a week. You can see a lot of the yellowing has disappeared. There is a little permanent damage here, see that? So I want to scoop that out.
That's a little rot, right?
Yep, a little bit of rot. There could have been a pathogen there, and it kind of just, the sun stress adds to it. Watch that plant, Scott, watch that mango tree. Okay, so look up here, let's see this. So this variety is a really good example. This Yala X, I love this plant, but it gets really yellow, especially when the sun has moved up after the solstice and the angle of the sun is just hitting here, right here during the mid part of the day when the UV is most intense. So you can see it's starting to get damaged here. I threw a little burlap on and you can see I stopped the damage that's got, this is sunburn, this is permanent damage here. Now it's not gonna affect the plant. You can see this one's got a fruit here and it got the same damage here last end of July, early August. So some varieties are more prone to it, some are more resistant. Look at this American Beauty, some yellowing here, not too concerned. Some branches you might lose in a case like this, you might just prune them back, but most of them are just gonna bounce back and do fine. So all the Epsom salts in the world are not gonna help these plants in this case. What will help is kind of like our bodies, right? If we get sunburned, we put on some sun care or stay out of the sun, and that's what these plants need. Some people even spray the clay, that also works well. And you can see, again, just that sun stress, it happens this time of year. You can add a little bit more nitrogen, fertilize your plants, and that will help as well. But there's nothing you can do. The best way is just add a little bit of shade, and in a few weeks, they'll do just fine. So another thing you want to consider is the age of your branches here. This is a young branch. You can see it's slightly yellow, but in this case, I would not protect it because you can see it's just so vigorous and healthy. And this is Gray Martin's 1355, which he bred to grow in full sun. So certain hybrids and varieties are more tolerant to the sun and UV versus maybe something like this Guatemalensis here. You can see it was really yellow. It's always yellow, but it's turned really green, and look at that. It's not affecting its fruit production. So this plant probably looked the worst in this plot. It was so yellow. It's got a little bit of sun damage here, you can see, but generally it's bounced back green, and look at all of the beautiful fruit. So remember, yellow isn't always bad. In other words, these plants kind of like a little stress. Now, something else like this, maybe you can see at a very specific angle, right where the trellis is coming over and tapering off, this is where you're going to get the most damage. And this is probably due to some of the genetics here. This is a cross. This is Black Dragon. It's Coniflorus, Solanaceus coniflorus crossed with Ocamponus. So that Coniflorus genetics is not as sun tolerant as maybe an Ocamponus, which is down there. Now, optimally, you can see shade cloth, again, is the best way to do it, or if you have a canopy. So this is Edgar's Baby and Don Burnett's Guatemalan from Taiwan. And you can see, look at, there's no yellowing. And it almost probably, I would argue, maybe gets too much shade in this spot. I was gonna prune off some more of the bamboo, but you can see it's not affecting the production. Look at the beautiful fruit. Okay, it's had really nice multiple waves. It's got another flower bud, and the Guatemalan's coming in too. So you can see this is a nice amount of sunlight, and it gets that afternoon sun. So this gets shade like you can see right now. It's what, 10 o'clock? And look at how shady it is. And it just gets that nice afternoon sun. and this plant is perfect. So this is probably an optimal location for these varieties. Now, you can see this voodoo child's really yellow, but it's not affecting their production. You can see some of the branches are yellow, and in this case, the type of yellow, I'm not too concerned. This is a very mild yellow, but I am gonna monitor it. If it starts to get that damage like I kind of showed you earlier, that's where I'm gonna cover it. Now, some people ask, well, what do you do with new plantings? And some people say you shouldn't plant in these heat waves. Well, what I do is, like, I planted all of these here just 2 days ago, and I just leave this burlap over them. So it must be, I don't know, over a dozen pots, 20 different varieties at least. Some are rare one-of-a-kind hybrids. And all I did is I just got a really nice stretch of this beautiful burlap. And I got this on Amazon. I'll put in the link. I like the burlap down here. This is this is Home Depot burlap. But if you look at the difference here, come on down, I actually like the one from Amazon better. So as you can see here, not all burlap qualities are the same. This is the roll from Home Depot, and this is the stuff I get on Amazon, and I prefer it.
What was the cost difference? I mean, was the stuff
I would actually say I think the Amazon was a little cheaper. Yeah. It's gone up in price. It's about 20 bucks a roll now. This one was a longer roll.
It's like they use double the fabric and double the material.
And sometimes what I do, if the sun burns really bad on the plant or the yellowing, I will actually do 2 layers of burlap. But I'm only going to buy the stuff from Amazon from now on. So I'll put in the link if you're interested in it. It's quite a long roll. I believe it's something like 20, 30 feet. And it's really nice quality. But this is all I do to prevent yellowing. So look at that. This plant was just planted here during a heat wave, 4 days ago? It's beautiful. So burlap is the trick. I just set it and forget about it. If you have a different trellis system like this will help prevent the yellowing. I just wrapped up the burlap, as you can see, and I'm still not done with the top here. So again, you want to remind yourself that the varieties are one factor why your plants are yellowing. As you can see, we have so many different varieties. The amount of sun, the time of year, your water quality, and in most cases, yellowing is caused by the UV index, the high UV, especially around the summer solstice and afterwards. So July, August, September in the Northern Hemisphere. So I hope that explains a little bit about why your dragon fruit turned yellow. Hey, this is Paul, and I get the question quite often is, why do I grow dragon fruit in pots? And I understand most of the world doesn't grow dragon fruit in pots, but there's several benefits. There are some negatives. The first negatives I could think about is the added cost and the fact that your nutrients and fertilizers are gonna wash out. But the main reason why I grow my dragon fruit in pots is not what you think. It's actually right here, pocket gophers. So we have such a bad gopher problem. I've killed over 200 gophers here since 2009 when we moved in, and they just come back every year. In fact, you can see our soil's hard and we have gophers here right now. So what I've done is I drilled small holes in our pots, so actually our roots come out and chase the nutrients and fertilizers, and the gophers love the dragon fruit roots. It's like candy to them, so they eat the roots, but they can't get inside the pots. So I am going to trial some in non-pots down here. That's hopefully going to happen this season. And I will have to build a cage so that the gophers can't get in. So the number one reason why I grow in my dragon fruit or in pots is because of the gophers. Now, a second reason that I've actually learned as I've grown these now for 6 years is that the dragons in the black pots actually wake up sooner than using terracotta pots or being in the soil. And I think that has to do with the temperature. In other words, the outer part of this pot is so hot right now with the sun, it's hot to the touch. In fact, it probably burns the roots right on the inside. But right now, it's on the inside of the pot, it's tolerable. I can touch it versus the outside. Now, you are gonna get some root burn on the outer edge, but if you're using compost-free potting soil and not using fox farms like we've talked about, well, your roots are not gonna be on this edge searching for oxygen. Your roots are gonna be all throughout the potting soil, so the heat won't damage them. So I argue, or I should say I've observed personally, that plants in the black pots start producing new growth and new flower buds sooner than ones either in the soil or in terracotta pots.
Wouldn't you say, though, the majority of people in our area, like, Southern California, grow into pots, or do you think
Ooh, that's a good question. I know Gray Martin has pots, but it's just compost and he breaks the bottom out.
Right.
And so I would say Generally, maybe in California it's close to 50-50, but I would say more people don't grow them in pots. Now, some other benefits of pots are there are less weeds, so I have better weed control, better control for the watering, so I can monitor the water. In other words, I will drip these plants until I see water coming out.
Could also protect from like rabbits too. Like
Oh yeah,
you
rabbits
mentioned.
can't really jump up here. They haven't yet, knock on wood. We also have ground squirrels. I have a family of ground squirrels down there that my family won't let me terminate or relocate. So pests is another thing. I can monitor for nematodes. I can check the health of the plant easier, in my opinion, and just how dry the soil is.
And
So,
change the soil easier.
change the soil. These ones, another factor is, especially if you grow in the northern hemisphere in those colder climates, you have to grow in a pot because you need your plant to be mobile. Because you might have to bring it in during the winter, like some of our Canadians friends do. I have a friend in Canada he's now had American Beauty for 2 seasons now, up in Canada.
And they got to put it in the garage.
But he
in the
has to
winter,
move
huh?
his plant around. He uses the right type of soil and basically cuts it back and lets it go dormant. In this case, I can't move these plants, and the trellis system I used is very permanent. But if you have a different trellis system, you can actually turn the pot. So maybe a newer branch is getting sunburned. Well, another good thing about a pot, you could actually turn the pot and rotate it. So there's a lot of benefits about growing dragon fruit in pots. There are some negatives. Again, the cost. Some people say the aesthetics. You can see they're not the most beautiful looking things. But in my case, this works really well because you can see it's a battlefield here. Look at the gophers are everywhere. And
Yeah,
I've killed them, hundreds of them, and they still just come back.
It doesn't matter, even you can definitely mitigate your problem, but you're still going to get the neighbors who don't do anything about them, and then they're going to come over from there. And they like to breed in the spring, so if you have a bunch going on, they're just going to go somewhere.
It brings in snakes. So we found 3 snakes here this week. Luckily, no rattlesnakes so far. We've had gopher snakes and 2 king snakes.
Those would probably do some damage.
So
to the
yeah,
gopher
I actually
population.
like having them here, and it's good that they're hopefully keeping the pest control down. But again, it's so nice to not have to worry about gophers destroying my plants here, at least the dragon fruit. So I hope that explains a little bit and you understand why I grow in pots. It's not the perfect optimal way, but in our case it is. So some people use it, some people don't. I'm more indifferent. I just use it out of necessity. But I look forward to trying it a different way in the future to see if it is going to be better or worse. Hey, this is Paul, and we get the question sometimes where people have a problem where the dragon fruit's not growing, like this example here. Believe it or not, this is one of George Emmerich Jr.'s Undatus, and it's 4 years old. And look at how neglected it is. I'm sad to say I've neglected it. And so we've done just about everything wrong to this plant that you can do. So one, it's in way too much shade, as you can see. So it only gets a little bit of sunlight in the afternoons, also in a really windy spot, if you can feel the wind or hear the wind. And then also I'm using, back then, that was Fox Farms potting soil. And I maybe added some pumice, maybe back then, or perlite. And you can see how much it's compacted over time. Also, the pot's too small. So all of these factors, look, a 4-year-old plant. In fact, I've grown seedlings from seed since I've gotten this plant, and they've already fruited. So you can grow these where they're almost in kind of like a comatose state. You know, it kind of reminds me of Han Solo in that metal, I can't remember what you call it, but that's kind of the analogy I'd say for this plant here. So I'm gonna show you how to fix this plant. We can get this thing to grow, no problem. So let's head to the back of the yard and give this thing some TLC. So believe it or not, these are the same age here. This is a seedling we grew from 2020, same time we got this. So definitely your soil health and plant health and fertilizers matter. So let me show you how I save this. Come on back. So the first step is that I want to remove all of that compost and old anaerobic soil. So I dump it out, and I'm rough with the plant. I just break it up. I want to get rid of as much of that compost as you can. You can see it's mostly turned actually to a lot of pumice. Don't want to breathe it if you don't have to. Try to save the main roots as well, like this big root here. You can see just what happens after 4 years now to potting soil with a lot of compost in it. I mean, that's a pretty pathetic root ball for 4 years, right? mean, look at that. So that's your first step. Then I'm gonna go ahead and repot it, but you can see, I think this pot is a little small. I like 5-gallon pots. I don't have any handy, so I'm gonna use this size. So this is our compost-free potting soil. It's kind of similar to Gary's Best Top Pot. It's got pumice, perlite, sunshine mix number 4, some biochar, humic acid, and earthworm castings. I think that's about it. I do have a little coconut core, and for what it's worth, I am no longer using that because over time the decomposers go crazy. They love to eat the coconut core, the chunky stuff. So within 3 to 4 years, it really kind of breaks down. It's kind of like, I think, a pill bug's favorite thing to eat, and earthworms as well. So no more coconut core in my potting soil. It's not bad, it's just, it attracts a lot of the decomposers in my experience. So I get it back into this nice potting soil mixture. And I like to make sure it's dry. You can see it's really dry soil. A lot of people say, why isn't it wet? Well, these are epiphytic cacti and they're really resilient. So I like to let them kind of dry out a bit in case I damage their roots for about, I don't know, 3 to 4 days before I water this really heavily. So just a little bit of time to recover. That should be about good. Always use planter's tape. You can see I also relabeled this. So I have these pens now that last a few years. So that way I won't get it mixed up. And then I even take the time to use metal tags. I'll do some metal tags as well. So I feel kind of embarrassed that I've neglected so many of these George Emmerich Jr. plants, but I'm not a big Undatus fan. I'm not a big Polyrhizis fan. They tend to kind of taste very similar. So I will treat them better, but I've just been neglecting them. So if you've been wondering what's happening, they're still around. They're just not getting treated as well as they should. So anyways, what I do is now is I'll get it in the shade just like that. Notice this is under a nice Haas avocado tree. It's gonna get tons of shade. In fact, you can see I did the same thing to a different George Emmerich Jr.'s plant here. This is number 17, and I did that a few weeks ago. And you can see, look at the difference. So soil health, getting it out of Fox Farms is key because look at the difference in color. See, when they're really unhappy, they're gonna be that more lime green color versus this dark green. And this one's really bouncing back. Now the next thing I would do is I would go and get some fertilizer. I really like Grow Power Plus, or you could use compost, Fox Farms, and put it on the top as a top dressing. So I'm gonna fertilize that, and again, I'm gonna water it in a few days. So that's, in short, what I do for these really sick, unhealthy dragon fruit plants that aren't growing, that are several years old, and this is how I get them to bounce back. So I expect that this thing will bounce back within a few weeks. So again, keep it out of the sun, don't stress it out some more, and then in a few days, keep it really wet, that nice potting soil, get it nice and moist, and I'll probably water this thing about 3 days a week. Hey, this is Paul, and today we're gonna share 7 tips that we use to help determine if our dragon fruit are ripe. So tip number 1 is you need to know your variety and your species. So believe it or not, some of our dragon fruit varieties take 7 months to ripen, like Sairong's Orange Dragon, Diego's Desert King. And in this case, like this one, Cotton Candy, it's been on here for around 40 days and it's still not ripe. It's starting to turn this yellow color. It's got a little bit of wiggle, but it's not ready yet. So coming around here, it looks like I have one that's almost ripe here. Look at the difference in color, this little one. A little looser, so it's starting to turn color. So still, tip number 1 is know your species variety. Tip number 2, we're starting to talk about it, is the color. Like, look at this beautiful fruit over here. This is Leo's eBay self-fertile. It's a Guatemalensis, and it was almost yellow yesterday, and look at it today. So the color, you can see that there's a little bit of green here, still a little bit too much. I'm gonna give this one more day just off of looking at the color alone. Now the third tip is gonna be looking at the cone. And we learned this from Wallace Ranch, is you wanna look in the cone because it will tend to split there first. So if you see a tiny little crack there, you know that you wanna pick it because within a day or two, it could split, so the fruit could split in half. And then you start to get ants in there and it's gonna ruin this fruit that you work so hard on. So tip number 2 is your color. Tip number 3 is your cone. And tip number 4, it is the wiggle test. So look at this beautiful fruit here. This is off of Leo Manuel's 4S. And this fruit's been in the shade here, so the color's a bit greener. But look at the wiggle test. It goes up and down easily and side to side. So I would say I could pick this one today, or definitely I want to pick this by tomorrow. So that is the wiggle test in a nutshell. Another indicator, you want to use all of these, and the more you see together, the more likely your fruit is going to be ripe. So tip number 5 now is going to be what Scott calls the squeeze test, right, Scott? And that's where you squeeze it, and it's got a little bit of give. You talked about it being a steak, right, Scott?
Maybe like a really well done steak.
Like a well done steak. Like it's not super dense like a green fruit, right? This is very, very dense. It has little give, but this one, it's almost, to me, it's like walking on like a squishy kind of floor or something. So to me, that's kind of how I describe it, but I would definitely say this one is definitely ripe. Okay, so tip number 7 is the weather and the climate and the forecast. So right now, if you can tell, we're really sweaty. The humidity's up, the temperature's up, so that means that the chance of your flower, or your fruit, excuse me, is gonna split, especially if you have a lot of water and moisture in the air. So I have a fruit up here that I think it looks a little green, but I think it has almost all the signs. Let's check it out. This is Benoit Red. And look it's always in the shade, so the color is gonna be a little bit of a less important factor. It's gonna be, in other words, it's gonna be greener because it gets a lot of shade. So first tip, it's got the right species, right? It's a Guatemalensis, it's been on here for about a month. Second tip, I'm looking at the cone, I see a little split. The color has a dynamic color. Again, it's a little green. And then the wiggle test, up, down, left, right. Okay, I feel like the climate, if I wait too long, this thing's probably gonna split, especially off that cone. And then Scott's squeeze test. And look at that, it feels kind of like a well done steak. So I would say this one definitely passed the test. I always clean my shears. I recommend doing that with CVX everywhere. So I use a spray, and boom, this beauty is ready to go in the fridge for a few hours, and I'm gonna enjoy this tonight. Hey, this is Paul, and today we're gonna talk about all of the new dragon fruit hybrids and seedlings that are coming into the market. And let's step back a little bit and think about the history. So we love all these new Dom Burnett seedlings. You could tell, beautiful flowers, Connie G has a delicious fruit. But if you think about it, the most common parent plant a lot of hybridizers are using is right here, and this is Connie Meyer. So due to the beautiful flower, the purple flower, a lot of people use this as a parent plant. Now the thing that I don't like about it is you can see, or it's more challenging for my zone you should see, is that it gets hot. It's not very hot and cold tolerant. In other words, it's gonna melt like this in the winter and the summer. I've lost a lot of branches. This plant's very old, and just every year the same thing happens, both in extreme and warm and cold environments. And the reason why is that this plant was actually created in Germany. It was a cross between Hylocereus stenopterus and a German undatus. So I have an undatus over here, and what I've learned over the years is that actually the species of undatus that they used is probably something similar to this, where it will break down in the heat waves. In other words, this fruit will really get gelatinous inside. In fact, here's a picture of it. You can see what it looks like. And that's a really bad trait, and it actually carries over into some of the hybrids, even into some of Paul Thompson's, like Purple Haze, I've noticed. So that is a bad trait, and it actually crossed it into Connie Meyer, Kathy Von Aram, and Bruni will all break down a little bit in the heat wave, the fruit itself and the plant. So these traits are not optimal, but luckily Dom Burnett crossed a Guatemalensis, a Guatemalan G1, which are my favorite fruit. So let's go up there and see what happened when Connie Meyer was crossed with a G1. So we just left Connie Meyer. Here's the other plant that Dom Burnett crossed, and this is G1, a Guatemalan from most likely Kwangong. Beautiful fruit, one of my favorite, and G1's a bit more sensitive than say G2 or G3. But either way, he crossed those and he grew 18 seedlings. We have quite a few of them, and let's go check them out and talk about them a bit. So first up, this is Cotton Candy 1-10. You can see a little sun stress, a little breakdown like its mother, Connie Meyer, but definitely not as bad. And also this is stress because I'm not protecting it from the sun. I'm not using any shade cloth. Also, it's on its third wave of fruit. So it's been banging out some delicious fruit. Now up here, here's Dom Burnett's 1-12, really stunning purple flower. I haven't had the fruit yet. It's almost ripe, as you can see. But again, that yellowing and a little bit of damage, probably from Connie Meyer. But overall, this plant's quite healthy, you can see, but again, just a little bit of sun damage. We've had a heat wave. We're gonna get over 100 degrees again this week. So I will put some burlap on this. Now here's probably the best tasting one in my opinion that I've had so far, and this is Connie G. And Connie G has just put on wave after wave. This is its third or fourth wave of fruit, and you can see it has half a dozen here. Bunch of beautiful ones. We crossed it with Pink Panther. I'm gonna actually grow some of the seeds here. But again, a little bit of damage. So you can see that some of the genetics have carried over, a little bit of sun sensitivity, cold sensitivity, but delicious fruit. Those are magenta inside, a really great fruit. Here's Honesty 1-3, one that we got and we named. I give it away for free. And the first fruit that we're gonna try is this one here. I can't wait to try it. So a lot of the beautiful traits. Oh, here's a Queen Daenerys, which is probably the most stunning flower. Hopefully here, you gotta see this flower. It's absolutely beautiful. And this is Queen Daenerys. And again, some of those traits. So I've learned over the years that when you're crossing things, they're still gonna be maybe a little bit better, but they're still gonna have some sensitivities from their parent plants. So let's head up on the hill and talk about some of the hybrids that I've been growing out. I've been really focused on the fruit production rather than the flower, and I'll tell you some of the goods and bads in my experience so far. So back in 2019, Scott and I actually went to our first Pitahaya festival, and this plant was released by Edgar Valdivia and Paco, and this is the official Asunta 5, as you can see. It's probably the most beautiful flower in our collection, but they use Tricia, and that was one of the parent plants, I believe the pollen source. And so as soon as I could, I took Tricia and I actually wanted to hybridize it myself. And we mixed Tricia and Paul's Laverne Pink. In fact, we did it both ways. So I used Tricia as a pollen source and a parent plant, and Paul's Laverne Pink vice versa. So this one was Paul's Laverne Pink crossed with Tricia pollen, and look at monstrosity, that's what we call it. So you can see that Tricia is an extremely dominant trait. In other words, I just used the pollen source on a Guatemalan Undatus hybrid, and look at how much this looks like Tricia, the long spines. I mean, the fruit even kind of, well, I don't know, Scott, what do you think about this fruit? It's sort of a very unique
You haven't
shape.
tasted it yet, right?
Yeah, we haven't tasted it yet.
This is the
But the
first.
shape alone is really unique.
Yeah, it's more oblong.
So we grew this out. It's been really an aggressive grower, doing quite well. It gets a little yellowing, just like the Asunta 5 Paco and Ventura. But man, really interesting how that crossed. Now we did the opposite, where I used Tricia as the mother plant and Paul's Laverne Pink as a pollen source, and that plant is actually down here a little bit. So let's go see what it looks like. I mean, we have so many hybrids here, but just these crosses I found really interesting. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. And this one actually was a little bit more sun stressed. So even switching the genetics, you can see this one even looks more like Tricia. It's probably gonna taste like Tricia too.
This hasn't budded yet? Or?
No,
Okay.
but I've had these a few years, but again, they both look Tricia, very Tricia dominant, whether I used it as the mother or as the father. So I found that it was to be really interesting. I can't wait for this one to flower and fruit. It's been a lot slower. So using the Tricia as the mother, the growth rate of this seedling has been less.
Do you think the fruit will be
I think it's going to
looking?
be a lot like Tricia. I'm actually kind of nervous to try it because Tricia's not my favorite. And that's honestly why I'm afraid to buy some of these Asunta 7s, because they used Tricia pollen at Asunta 5, and then they used a Valdivia Roja on Asunta 7.
Why do you think they're using Tricia pollen? Just because of the flower trait?
I'm not
that
sure.
they
I
get,
think
or-
I really think Edgar Valdivia has always really been focused on a beautiful flower. I mean,
Right.
hence the start of Asunta. But man, once it got to Asunta 5, I see why he crossed it with Tricia for the flower, but I'm a little nervous to try the fruit. So my mindset has always been really delicious fruit. So that's why really early on, a gentleman that knew way more than me, a hybridizer named Richard Reed, he gave us a G3 crossed with physical graffiti pollen. And he just gave us a little seedling. I grew it out and look at it now. And honestly, I hate to say it, this is probably my favorite fruit of the season. And I know it's our own hybrid, and we sell these just as much as any other plant. So to me, it's not a super expensive plant. But man, the flavors of this, I'll never forget. It tasted like Dark Star, straight to American Beauty with a little bit of Caslau. And you know what that tastes like, Scott, where it's like that mashed berries.
Yeah, it's really good.
I did run a self-fertility check. Let's see, I have it somewhere here, and it failed. So this plant, oh, there it is. So see, it aborted. So I bagged it and did a proper self-fertility check, and it aborted, which shows that actually that's a good thing in this case, in my opinion, because I know that it was crossed with PG. Part of me was worried, well, how do you know with a self-fertile like G3, how do you really cross-pollinate that? What if it pollinated itself? So those are just some things I've been thinking about, but either way, this fruit is delicious, which is the goal. We really want high quality fruit. Now, Linda Nickerson early on recommended that we grow this plant out. So the first time I met her, we bought some fruit and she said, Paul, you need to grow these seeds out. And this is her physical graffiti. And she said that she used mixed pollen, and she said, grow these seeds out. Back in 2019, Scott, this is one of the first fruit we reviewed, and look at it now. Now it's got in multiple waves. So again, I really like those physical graffiti flavors, right? They're self-sterile, but man, the traits of that plant is vigorous, it's an aggressive grower. All these things are personally things that I want for our own hybrids. And you can see this thing, it got a little sun damage. Well, look at that. So, probably the undatus trait, or just, I didn't cover these at all, and we've had a really long, hot summer. In fact, you can see probably the plants are more yellow than they've ever been. And I hope that we'll get some nice cool weather. I'm gonna fertilize them today. But man, some seasons in Southern California, it's just really incessant long heat, high UV, and that's another thing I really want to improve on breeding, is that we want to have plants that can tolerate this full sun. So let's go show you some other hybrids that we have in our collection that people were able to cross to make beautiful fruit, self-pollinating, and can take full sun. Let's go show you some of Gray Martin's. So hopefully you know who Gray Martin is. He, to me, in my opinion, is one of the most important people in dragon fruit farming, and he is a commercial grower and he's a hybridizer as well. And this is his 1355. You can see it does great in our full sun. In fact, this is under a year old. I got some cuttings less than a year ago and it's already topped the trellis. Now he's created self-fertile, self-pollinating varieties, and some of his commercial ones include, I believe, Praise and Glow, just to name a few. So this one's unreleased. I'm never gonna share it. The fruit's delicious. It's a magenta flesh, but again, really happy full sun plant. You could tell that the genetics he used probably were a Guatemalan and an undatus. Now he also gave us opal. He was very kind. Here's opal over here. And again, you can see, look, it gets full sun in our climate, probably one of the hottest spots in the yard. And he gave this to us a year ago. He said, treat it right, it will flower for you. And my gosh, look at this thing. Very aggressive, happy grower, multiple waves. I know very little about this plant, actually. I would assume it's self-fertile, probably self-pollinating. And if I had to guess, I think it's more of a lighter colored flesh, but this is opal. So you can see that he's crossed and hybridized and practiced growing thousands of seedlings for years, and he got some traits that he wants. Again, self-fertile, full sun, the undatus, I believe, the genetics in here, the fruit doesn't break down like we talked about earlier. So wow, these are some winners. And I guarantee you he spent a lot of time growing different seeds. So let's move on. Let's talk about some more hybrids that we're releasing and kind of the ideas about why and how to distribute them so they could be evaluated in different climates. So let's go up the hill and talk some more. So here's one of our Orahona seedlings. This is seedling number 7. And as you can see, I actually grafted this as a seedling tip graft years ago. And look at how thick and gnarly it is now. And so as I grew it, it grew really rapidly. It produced a lot of delicious fruit like Linda's Red, although this one's a little bit greener. Everything about the flower and the fruit is a greener in color. And I thought it was really important to degraft this and grow it out as well because of this plant. Now this plant is Thanos, which is a rare hybrid from Puerto Rico. And I grew this thing for years, and every season it just got damaged from the roots. It just was totally weak. And very long story short, I found out that this hybrid was grafted, and it only does well grafted. So in other words, the seedling has a really weak root system. So in 2 years, 2 winters, it's rotted out, and I've started again. So I have to graft this to be able to grow it. So it got me thinking, so with this Orahona seedling grafted, I decided I would grow it degrafted in a totally different environment down the hill. Now before we go down there and talk about that one, check this out. Here's another sister seedling I have, and this is seedling number 6. It's never flowered, and you can see I'm just letting it do its thing this season. And here's our first one that flowered. This is Linda's Red. Actually, it's one of the best reds we've had. It's really, really delicious, I have to say. Same with Orahona seedling number 8. But these seedling sisters have been just really great, delicious, productive plants. And again, I've been growing them ungrafted here. So that one that I grew grafted, I decided to degraft it, and I put it in a totally different environment. Meaning that one up there was getting protected from the bamboo. It was about 65 to 70% sunlight. So I took some cuttings of it just probably 2 seasons ago and decided to put it with El Grullo down here in our full hot sun. And you can see that I'm happy and pleased to share that it's doing great. In fact, I get to try grafted fruit versus ungrafted fruit to see if there's a difference. So this plant, you can see I threw it in the extremes, full sun, 100% sun. Got a little yellowing on this one branch, but look at how productive it is. It's got multiple waves, multiple flowers. So it was just really important for me to see how does that plant do ungrafted. And you can see here in this case, it's doing just fine. So it takes years and years to properly evaluate a dragon fruit. You're going to need a big crew of people to help evaluate it with you, try it in different climates, and be ready to have your feelings hurt, because some people may not like the fruit that you're growing, or they may think the flower's not pretty. So you can't please everybody. The goal is, for me at least, is to produce really high quality fruit that can tolerate full Southern California sun. So hopefully you've been following us. We've been ruining and taking out a lot of plants this season. I hate to say, I think Connie's gonna go. I love her, but man, this is just not what I want. So right back where we started, the genetics of this plant, created by a German hybridizer, Eckhart Meyer, are just not exactly what I want in Southern California. So lessons learned, a lot of lessons learned, and I look forward to keep breeding these mysterious plants and making mistakes and having fun. Hey, this is Paul, and thanks for checking out our fruit review on Esmeralda, the green-skinned pitahaya from Mexico, and it's going to be a white-fleshed undatus. So really interesting looking fruit. Now it's hard to pick them when they're ripe, and they take quite a long time. I've heard 60 to 90 days, and what we did is we just waited until they cracked. So see how they cracked there? We did have a heat wave, and they were a little loose. So we tried, and we also did the squeeze test. They feel like a ripe avocado. So let's go for it. Let's see how these taste. And it looks like this one may needed more time. We'll see. There's the first one. Here's the next one. And so far, it's looking like the heat wave didn't damage the fruit too bad, although this one got damaged, see? So that's a bummer trait. So I was gonna hybridize it with this American Beauty pollen. I crossed it, but I'm not sure if I wanna grow the seeds seeing that trait. So it better wow me. So let's go ahead and taste a few and see just how sweet they taste. That's pretty good. Yeah, probably worth growing some seeds to see. Pretty typical undatus flavor. Mild. Hard to tell which one's sweetest. Maybe Brixton, probably around the 15s, if I had to guess. But they have a really nice texture, zero mush, which is great, and pretty mild fruit. Not much tartness at all, which I like. So some undatus are just really kind of tart, not very flavorful. Some are earthy. There's such a wide range. So 15 and 6/10. There we go. And we'll try maybe one more. Let's see what happened with this American Beauty one. Crossed with American Beauty pollen. Let's see if it's any sweeter. It's definitely a little smaller. And what's interesting about these fruit is that they get rather large. So I probably bet they might get into like 2 pounds. Ooh, air, too much air. I mean, these fruit get really large consistently, well over a pound, which is nice. That's one of the reasons why I'm interested in so even less sweet. So there you go, 12 to 15. Let's just go for a few, see, describe what the flavors are. Seeds are mild, rather small. Zero earthiness. Actually, definitely one of the better undatas that I've eaten. I like it more than K1 and more than Neitzel. Pretty too. Yeah, just all in all mild, very little tartness, nice sweetness. You could eat a lot of them. This one tastes the best. No, I have seen with really thin skin, so they'll get larger with thin skin. I think they have bricks near 20. So I'm sure that these would even taste better. I've left some on the vine to see what happens when they're approaching more like 90 days. And unless they split, I'll just leave them on there for a while. But definitely a keeper in our variety. It does really well in our climate in zone 9B. The plant material here, check it out. This is what the plant material looks like. Big, beautiful flowers. And all in all, just an aggressive, healthy grower, does really well in Southern California. And look at that, really unique looking fruits. Especially before they split. I mean, look how beautiful that skin is. Okay, give us a like and a subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have yourself a wonderful day. Take care.